is Turbo, the flying dog. Turbo's been flying for over 100 hours now. When he was a puppy, I went to a dog rescue to pick him up via airplane, and he's been flying ever since. Today we're going to read you Turbo Flies Through History, the third book of Turbo, the Flying Dog series. Turbo Flies Through History. Turbo was once a lonely puppy at the pound, waiting for a place to call home. Luckily, that was a long time ago. Now he was a pilot and enjoyed traveling around the world with his friend Olive. One day, Turbo and Olive looked over his logbook where they kept track of all their flights together. "It's time for another adventure," Olive exclaimed. Turbo agreed, because he loved to fly. After completing a pre-flight to make sure the aircraft was ready to fly, Turbo and Olive took to the sky. "Bark, bark, and away," they howled. Turbo pulled back on the yoke and the aircraft left the runway. Once in the air, Turbo noticed a button he hadn't seen before. It was a bright red and it said, "History." "Wait," said Olive, but it was too late. Turbo had already pressed it. "That's the time machine button," she yapped. Colorful swirls engulfed the airplane. Turbo took his paws off the yoke. Suddenly, they were on the ground, and Turbo looked around. "Where are we?" he asked. "Look," Olive said, pointing. Flying didn't start with airplanes. It started with hot air balloons. Hot air makes balloons rise. They were originally made from paper, and the first passengers were a sheep, a duck, and a rooster, she explained. The colorful swirls quickly reappeared, and Olive and Turbo felt themselves pushed through time again. The dog saw a shadow below them and looked down. A fabric-covered airplane with 2 wings flew by. "I know that biplane," Turbo shouted. "That's the Wright Flyer, the first powered airplane to fly." The Wright Flyer landed, and the dogs heard a cheer from the 2 brothers. "Well, that was short," Olive snorted. "It was," Turbo agreed. "The first flight was only 12 seconds long, but look where we are today because of it. The Wright brothers made history." "Here we go again," Olive said as their plane started moving forward. "Bark, bark, and away," Turbo cheered. As the colors faded, Turbo looked around and heard yips, yaps, and howling. Olive and the dogs around them were looking at a large iron structure. It was the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. The crowd was cheering for a small plane circling the tall tower. Turbo thought very hard, and soon he remembered a story his mother once told him. "That is the Spirit of St. Louis," he told Olive. It was the first airplane to complete a non-stop flight from New York to Paris. "Bark, bark, and away," he shouted to the brave pilot. Olive turned towards Turbo. "Do you know what I want to see next? One of the first airliners." Soon she got her wish, and Turbo found themselves inside a noisy metal plane. Other passengers surrounded them, wearing fancy clothing. Olive looked out the window and started counting. 1, 2, 3, she yelped. "There are 3 engines, so we must be on the Ford trimotor." Flying on an airline used to be so special. Travelers would dress up for their flight. Turbo knew at any moment they could be transported to a new time. With so many important planes in history, he wondered where they had left to travel. Airplanes didn't only get larger over time, they also got faster. "Look at that," Olive barked. "That's the B-29 Superfortress. It carried the X-1. The bottom of the Superfortress opened up, and a sleek, bright orange jet came into view. Turbo's eyes grew wide. "The X-1 is the first plane to break the sound barrier. Look at how fast it is. I wish I could fly that fast." Turbo looked at Olive with a goofy grin on his face. "The history button is really cool," he said. "I've learned so much today. What is left?" "There's still so much more," Olive replied. "Helicopters, gliders, balloons, airplanes. Aircraft are constantly changing." It's time to get going, Olive said. We have a few more stops before we go home. The dogs got back in their plane. Turbo could only imagine what was left to see. Suddenly, it was very dark. Turbo's eyes took a moment to adjust, and then he looked out the window. He saw sparkling stars against a black sky. A silver sphere with long legs like a spider went by. Where are we and what is that? He asked Olive. The history button brought us to space, Olive exclaimed. That was Sputnik 1, the first artificial Earth satellite. It started the space race, Olive continued. That was when each country wanted to put the first person in space. We've come so far since then. As if on cue, the plane started zipping through time again. Turbo watched the swirls, waiting to see where they could possibly end up next. When they cleared, he and Olive were still looking out into space. A space shuttle loomed in front of them. I've always wanted to be an astronaut, Olive said. Since Sputnik, we've been to the moon, manned a space station, and someday we might go to Mars. Wow, Turbo said in awe. I'd love to go to Mars, but we'd have to refuel first. Like magic, Turbo and Olive were sitting at the controls of the spaceship, looking at a full fuel gauge. They looked at each other and smiled. Bark, bark, and away!